Hello. This is not my usual time for recording, but it's fine. So, we are now on chapter 8. They're in America now, not Africa. And this is actually a very short, so hopefully I'll be able to read at least and finish part 1, which has only taken me a few years. 1 year? Okay. Six, a Clarkson and Gay was driving a local. He looked in his rear mirror and saw a constant police cruiser with its light. Chime, who K. Chime, puzzled over what he might have done wrong. He wasn't speeding. That he was. He had just pulled out of the driveway of his apartment complex and hardly had a chance to accelerate when the cruiser's lights began to flash. Chime also wondered why he had been singled out. His vehicle had been hemmed in by a slow-moving car in front and another car behind. All three vehicles were moving along the narrow space on Montreal Road at a crawl. As he pulled his 2005 Honda Accord onto the shoulder and waited for the officer to approach, Chime held out hope that it had all been a misunderstanding and that he'd soon be on his way. Behind the wheel of the cruiser, officer hired by Chief Charlie Nelson, and who had a George for the area for the quote unquote fit to serve as a police officer in a psychological review. In part, the therapist because of his volatile temper. He informed Nelson about his past. Anyway, another officer was assigned to work with but by the time he pulled over Chime in January 2006, Jordan was working to be alone. Even so, the business to interaction with Clark's cruiser. At first glance, Chime appeared typical had a dark complexion and spoke with a pronounced African accent. In fact, Chime had been in the United States for 9 years. He had come as an immigrant, not as a refugee, for the same reason to the United States, to make a better life for himself, moving to which he found an immigrant than New York. It was more multicultural than New York, Chime said. All places seemed to be very well. The wasn't as bad. I was impressed because you get a job and live in a decent house, and you can start a small business with not much money. And thought he could make a business of it in Atlanta. The steady flow of immigrants and refugees provided a market for reliable homes. For startup capital, Chime bought his car for $1,500, then hung a shingle in a modest strip mall just outside of Clarkston. In the intervening 8 years, Chime's business had grown steadily. His company was grossing some $120,000 a year, $50,000 of which he had employees and had become well known in the community by helping newcomers with their tax returns. He thought of himself as a walking embodiment of American dream. In Clarkston, he stood out for his success. He dressed well and appears to his new car, but and even hostility from bumpers and sagging suspensions. I have a dark skin pigment. You can't have dark skin and in Clarkston without harassment. It was dark when Jordan approached the vehicle on Montreal Road. Jordan standard is shadow, but a light with no casing. Jordan asked Chime the officer what he had done wrong. I have started was know his rights and to understand the requirement of probable cause for traffic stop. He seemed not to appreciate Chime's teammate to get out of the car and to produce his driver's license. I stopped for speeding, Jordan said, his voice sharpening. I wasn't speeding. I just having Chime by his lapel and slam him back against the car, and then spun Chime around. Now Chime had his hand up and was leaning over the trunk. It was a full. Chime protested that he was trying to get his driver's license as Jordan had ordered, but Jordan was now in full-on confrontation mode. He grabbed Chime around the head, which he pushed toward the ground, and twisted Chime's arms behind his back. Chime was now pleading for mercy, but with his arms behind his back and Jordan shoving his head down, Chime began to lose his balance and to tip over toward his right. At this moment, Jordan, holding Chime's arms behind his back with one hand, took his metal flashlight and with a roundhouse motion bashed Chime on the back of the head. Chime wasn't sure what had hit him. He was stunned and fell toward the pavement. And fell toward the pavement with Jordan on top of him, pressing his face into the asphalt. Jordan reached in his belt and pulled out a small can of pepper spray, or actually cayenne oil, a more powerful form of pepper spray that often causes severe swelling in the eyes and faces of those unlucky enough to get a dose. Clarkston Police Department regulations require officers to carry 2 bottles of water in their squad cars in order to rinse the substance from the faces of any suspects on which they'd had to discharge the chemical. Jordan placed the nozzle against Chime's face and eyes and pressed the button. Chime cried out and was silent. He fainted, he believes. The video camera captured Jordan's next words to a now flaccid Chime. "It's you. It's Africans," Jordan said. "I have nothing but problems from you guys. Always love to argue. That's why there's so much crap going around here. Because you guys don't understand, I've got a job to do." Chime felt his face and windpipe swell from the cayenne oil. His head was throbbing from the flashlight strike. Jordan never turned the from Chime's eyes. At one point on the tape, in the backseat of the cruiser and complained about the chemical orders to him to hold their eyes out. And flushed his eyes with some relief. Chime revived and taken away. She spoke on a variety of charges, including Friday at the DeKalb County Jail, and in the confusion, no one told that he would be eligible for bail. She wanted to notice his absence. He and his wife had separated, so he sat in jail for one night and yet another, essentially lost in the system. As he waited among a population of 20 men, Chime's grade he would not for his safety, 12 years. The incident involving Chike Chime and Master Jordan underscored the degree to which tensions in Clarkston, some 15 years more after Roman began. While some Jordan often bleed a rogue cop with an anger management problem, months later, in the relative calm of a lawyer's office during a deposition related to the incident, he was able to articulate the frustrated social landscape around Atlanta and who, in his view, weren't doing enough to adapt to local customs. They're in America now, immigrants and refugees, not Africa. Okay, I just need to pause before we get to chapter 9, which says "Get Lost" is the title, and then I will read as fast as I can so I can finish that chapter and then finally move on to part 2, which has taken much longer than I thought it would, but progress is progress, so I really don't want to dwell on that. I just need to focus on this past chapter because it is 2022, and I'd like to say that these events have stopped or decreased, but if you pay attention to the and there is such injustice in society in where I live, in a region, but even where I live as well, and many other places that I often visit. And I think that it's sad, but it's true. I mean, it's a huge reason why I don't read news and I don't just, because it's just depressing. But like I said before, when I read the very first chapter, and I will keep saying this, this is why people need to speak up. And this is why I fight for injustice. And this is why we need to understand that, at least for me personally, I have nothing against the police. But I would say that I often feel a lot safer when I am in a community where I see other people of color. And in fact, for me, when I am in any town that is mostly white people, I actually feel a lot more. I guess it's not scared, but I guess I just feel more. I feel like I have to be careful with how I behave, as opposed to when I'm in where I see other people who are ethnic minorities or just other people predominantly. So I guess maybe the pandemic has to this because I am Asian American and I never really cared as a but in fear, and so I still live in fear. But I guess I just worry for people around me because I know people who have victims and myself. That's when I didn't realize I was in here. So, yeah, I just wanted to keep sharing that. Even though there may be darkness and sadness around with the economy or violent things, one another physically, mentally, but that's why we wake up, because the sun will rise and yeah, things will get better because if you don't, and but yeah, find what it is, whoever it is, because I think that's most important. So if it's important to you to support people who are in need and help other people, then please, by all means, however you can try to help, even if it's just with a smile, even if it's just paying for that person to see behind you, every little bit helps. Okay, chapter 9, lost. Feeling it. Okay. These themselves were not tensions between refugees and some locals. At about the same time as the incident between Jime and Jordan, began to at the community center. Refugees practice. Emmanuel Ransom, at the center, who no longer criticized the refugee community for more than center's upkeep. They're literally poor. Sorry, that's just me. Okay, moving on. I need to stop talking or stop commenting. Thought okay, which should be more for MCU. Chambers got into the field, why hire security guards. The why balked. While her sponsors and hosts squabbled, Luma tried to stay focused on her player and their families. But late in the spring season of 2006, she received a call from an executive at the YMCA who told her that the relationship between the Y and the center had broken down completely. The Fugees, Luma learned, were no longer welcome play at the center at all. Luma still had games to play that spring, so she scurried to find a place for her team to practice. She eventually found an unused field a few miles outside of Boston and managed to cross from the shuttle player back and forth from the park complex to financially or logistically. We have a few months away by the time Luma could get. Luma didn't know what she would do for a permanent fix, so she focused on the remaining games and vowed to work on the field issue over the summer. At the end of the soccer season, Luma was usually exhausted. She liked to take to spend a little time visiting friends from or go to the mountains of western North Carolina, where she would turn off her cell phone and lose herself in the cool air and calming perfume of the laurels and rhododendrons. In a quiet moment before leaving Clarkston to recuperate, Luma logged on to Google Earth and scanned a satellite view of town for open spaces. From orbit, Clarkston was full of rectangles, gray splotches of asphalt. All those apartment complexes alongside white and distinct from a fusion of angular shapes and shadows that emanate from China in a pattern of density. Where there was a jade tangle in the middle of Clarkston, however, Armistead Field in Millen Park. It was less than a half mile from the whole community, easily accessible from all corners of the perhaps it worked. We would need permission from Mayor Swaney, who to entail to take the matter up when she was rested. August and the beginning of a new season was still a long way off. In the spring of 2006, at the time Luna learned the Fugees had been booted from the community center field, a 26-year-old Sudanese refugee named Nathaniel decided to organize a soccer team in Clarkston. Noak, who lived in Clarkston, was one of the Lost Boys, a group of young men from southern Sudan who had been separated from their families during a civil war between the Muslim and Arab North and the Christian and African South. The boys had endured unimaginable misery in a years-long year through the Sudanese wilderness, crossing rivers full of crocodiles and scrub roamed by ravening lions before making it to a series of refugee camps across the border in Kenya and Ethiopia. Neok had been separated from his family during fighting when he was 8 years old. With other orphans, he had made it to Kakuma, a sprawling, water-starved refugee camp of more than 70,000 in an arid corner of northwestern Kenya, where he lived for 10 years before he was accepted for resettlement, along with thousands of other Lost Boys in the United States. 150 of the Lost Boys have been resettled in and around Atlanta, and many of them, like Nathaniel Neok, ended up in the apartments of Clarkston. Resettlement had been hard for the Lost Boys, but they had difficulty by relying on one another. Their main escape was soccer, and so Nathaniel Neok had no problem recruiting players for a club team he started and called simply the Lost Boys Soccer Team. We grew up playing soccer, Neok said. We are still young, and so we just want to play and keep our game alive. Some of us still have this trauma of not having our parents. So we just want to have a little fun. Neok and his team needed a place to practice and noticed that the field in Millen Park, which was owned and maintained by the city of Clarkston, was hardly ever used. Armistead Field, as it was called, was the town's general purpose field. A large rectangle with a blanket of rich Bermuda grass, Armistead was surrounded by thick strands of pine trees and sat at the foot of a hillside that offered perfect bleacher-like viewing. At opposite ends of the field, there were rusty chain-link backstops, vestiges of a long-defunct little ball program. Lately, there was no activity on the field at all. It was just a giant vertical pitch of green. There was one small sign fixed to around the field warned that no one was to use permission from City Hall. Nathaniel had been an area long enough to know that Clarkston City was a town of rules. Cops doled out traffic tickets to drive for violations that came to any newcomers. One local refugee owner who had a small remodeling project without the proper permit had been handcuffed and carried away to jail. That's ridiculous. Sorry, Side comment. One less side comment. This wouldn't happen, right? If that refugee was white. Just like to say that. If he had like the perfect American accent, you can't see the quote, but where am I? Okay, sorry. Signs in Milam Park notified pickers to obtain permission before someone was eating a sandwich in the shade of large wooden pavilions there. And as a result, the pavilions remained mostly empty on even the balmiest summer Saturdays. There was even a sign in Milam Park notifying visitors that simply walking a dog on the park grounds, even leashed, would bring a fine of no less than $500. Clarkston, it was clear, was a town that liked things just so. He didn't want any trouble for himself or for his team. Despite their urge to hop the fence and start playing soccer immediately on Armistead Field, he did as and known to most in town simply as Coach Cooper. One time, Neok was told, oversaw scheduling of the fields in Milam Park. Nathaniel called Cooper, who was pleasant and happy to schedule the Lost Boys for use of Armistead Field. So late one afternoon, Neok and his friends went to the park to scrimmage. It wasn't long before the first squad car showed up from the Clarkston Police Department. They claimed it was neighbors who called and told on us, Neok said. We said, we don't drink, we don't make noise, we don't cause any problems. Why can't we play? They said, we can't tell you, but you have to leave the field. Neok and his teammates left the field, certain there had been some kind of misunderstanding. Neok called Coach Cooper, who confirmed that the Lost Boys had permission to play. Again, they took to the field to practice, and again the police came. When Neok asked for an explanation, he said, the police refused to respond. The police were rude, he recalled. They would intimidate us every time they came. Neok was annoyed and determined to get some answers. He went to City Hall and asked Mayor Swaney. Swaney denied any knowledge of the situation, and Neok took it up with the chief. The chief, too, claimed ignorance and told Neok that Coach handled the for Armistead Field. Neok Cooper gave the Lost Boys permission. The police lead. This absurd process went on over the course of several weeks. Sorry, this is just like infuriating. Until the Lost Boys soccer team had been on the field at least 8 times. The last time Neok said both he and the police were interfering with his right to assembly as the United States Constitution. The police were in no mood for a lesson on constitutional law from a Sudanese refugees. They gave us a warning that myself and some of my assistants would be arrested. Neok said, I wanted to talk to them, but they tell me, keep quiet or you will go to jail. I was quite upset. I decided I don't want to get in trouble for soccer. Nathaniel Neok and his friends were worn down and thought they finally understood the reason behind the treatment they were receiving from Clarkston town officials. It came into our mind that it's because we are not from this country, he said. Neok and his friends were disappointed not to have a place to play soccer, but more about what the whole about didn't feel outsiders. When I came to America, I heard it was the land of opportunity. And indeed it was, but on that particular day, I was disappointed. It was too bad for me and my team. We live in Clarkston. If we can't play in our city, where can we play? In July, a little more than a month before tryouts for the Fugees fall season, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal Constitution named Mary Lou Pickle win a dispute over the use of the field in Milam Park. Pickle interviewed the mayor and published the dispute in a 603-word article. The Lost Boys of Sudan want soccer in the new hometown of Clarkston. The refugees play it. There will be nothing but baseball as long as but I do have a problem with the big guys because those fields were made for. The mayor's comments also Nathaniel Nook. In his conversation with the mayor over the field, he said the mayor had never mentioned any prohibition on big guys playing there, or any ban on at all. He simply referred them to Coach Cooper. Something didn't quite make sense to Neil. Why would the mayor send him on a wild goose chase involving the police chief, Coach Cooper, and numerous Clarkston police officers if the issue was simply that there was a rule against adults playing soccer in the field? Something else didn't follow. Whatever a large green rectangle of grass had been made for, New York felt it could probably sustain plenty of football, soccer, ultimate frisbee, lawn bowling, doing cartwheels, sunbathing without upsetting the cosmic order. But even so, there was a more explicit problem with the mayor's argument that, as he put it, those fields were for soccer. In the corner of the parking lot above the disputed grass in England Park, there was a sign that in faded lettering proclaimed the name of this public space to any who might pass by, Armistead Field. Beneath those three simple painted illustrations, sun bleached but still decipherable, declared exactly what sort of names the park was intended. Clarkston's residents gave the park's founders intended residents to play on the field. There was a drawing of a football, and just as prominently, a patchwork orb of geometric shapes, clearly recognizable as a soccer ball. In fact, Mayor Sweeney was one of the politicians around the country in his consternation over the soccer problem. Controversies over the use of public soccer in years. Disputes over soccer parks were frequently fast-growing cities to the immigrants, particularly Latinos, from soccer-playing cultures around the world. Unable to get field time on parks for American football, soccer enthusiasts around were moving games to whatever open spaces they could find. In Doraville, a suburb of Atlanta, a group of immigrants approached a public cemetery. A group of local white kids tossing a frisbee in a cemetery would probably not make the papers, but soccer seemed to be different. Indeed, the Doraville cemetery incident and the town mayor's angry reaction received coverage in the local press. Soccer, perhaps more than ever, had become a conspicuous symbol of cultural change. The sight of a large group of Latino men taking over a public space as if it were their own to play a foreign-seeming game, no less, seemed to cause America growing fed up with immigration, legal or otherwise. In justifying his soccer ban in Clarkston, Mayor Sweeney had cited an argument public officials against the sport, the grass defense. It was a held among soccer detractors that the game harder on turf than other sports. There was something to charge. Americans typically play soccer in highly structured settings, which schedule games. Parents showed up a half before game time. With blankets and lunch, then the field usually maintaining immigrants tended to play soccer more the way American youths played basketball in public parks, in spontaneous games that went on all day. It was also true that many soccer-playing immigrants to America came from nations where the game was less likely to be played on fields than on rectangles of bare earth taking for the constant use. Poor immigrants and refugees from war-torn nations, it's probably fair to say, do not share American collective lawn care. really long, like the whole grass green on. I think this is the but it's just, yeah, how significant that was. It happened in the community where we've been receiving multiple emails about making sure that the lawns are watered. Um, the thing on nature, like there is rain that comes from the sky, but apparently that's not enough for a grass, I guess. But I don't want to go into a whole thing about climate change. So anyway, sorry, moving on. Okay, I need to finish. Okay. And yet, sorting out fair and responsible use of playing fields in public parks was not among society's more insurmountable problems. All around the country, in fact, progressive city and county governments were taking steps to accommodate soccer's growing popularity by developing scheduling systems so that fields could be shared for multiple uses. And in the case of DeKalb County, in which Clarkston was situated, converting less traffic to soccer would have been easier than in most places for the simple reason that time in Milam Park. No one besides the lost boys actually wants to of all the episodes. This one puzzled Nathaniel. In the weeks following the General Constitution story, he would drive to Milam Park to have a look at the activity there, expecting to see all those baseball teams Mayor Sweeney was looking out for. No baseball teams or anyone else. It's a beautiful meadow, neatly mowed and seeming to cry out for someone to roll some kind of ball across it. It was empty, Neil said, confusion still in his voice. Indeed, there were no on the field. When Luna heard Atlanta neighbor, her heart sank. It was midsummer. Tryouts for the refugees' fall season were fast approaching, and she had hoped to hold them out on the very field that Sweeney had declared off limits to soccer. His statement that the park was reserved exclusively for baseball has seemed unequivocal. Luma concluded that she would have to make other plans. She had just a month to find the refugees a new home field within walking distance of the apartment complexes where her players lived. Since the refugees had almost no budget, save the small amount to cater to help YMCA had put into equipment and no use of a small bus to get to away games, Luma wouldn't be able to pay much, if anything, to rent a field. Her options were few. Administrators at the YMCA offered to help out. And after a few weeks, they called Luma to let her know they found a field out back of Elementary School, just across the Clarkston town line on one of the town's main drags. Luma had driven past Indian Creek Elementary School countless times without ever realizing that there was a field out back. One afternoon in July, she got in her car and drove to see her team's new home. When she saw the field at Indian Creek Elementary, Luma was stunned. It was a rutted, gravelly moonscape of gray chalk with a few tufts of grass on the edges. The field and surrounding asphalt track were covered with grass from broken bottles. And there were no soccer goals, only a couple of rusting and wrenched chain link back. Despite the position, there was a crowd. Members of the Clarkston refugee community were taking afternoon strolls around the track. Young men were playing their own pickup games of soccer on the field. There was a jungle gym alongside the track where parents watched their toddlers tumble. Basketball court. Young men went back and forth between playing hoops and sitting in their cars, smoking bags. As one of few open space in Clarkston available to the public, the field at Indian Creek Elementary well used. It's a rotten place to run a youth soccer program. There was broken glass everywhere, electrical hanging down, Luma said, and mass chaos. Luma liked to run her practices in private. Players were free of distractions. The field at the community center was in the town library, away from the social flow. At Indian Creek, on the other hand, was something like the refugees' town square. The field at the community center was fenced, and Luma had no problem running off her players' friends who stopped by after school to heckle them as they submitted to her regimen of running and calisthenics. At Indian Creek, anyone could wander onto the field, and there was little about it. The field had pine trees on the field's northern side. The Elementary school was set at times where Luma could run cheering for her kids to practice. Perhaps best of all, the field was free. The principle of Indian Creed given with the understanding that she was not free. There were no resolved to put the best face on the new field. There were no bathroom shots during soccer. She would tell her players, for example, so that there would be no bathroom breaks during this either. But if pressed, Luma would admit the situation with the field made her angry. Nurse Sweeney at the folks who ran the community center, and her sponsors at the YMCA. Well, she was tired harder, made the community stand. They were unreasonable. Another thought nagged Luma. She knew that if a soccer team of well-to-do suburban kids to play on a field of sand, broken glass, their parents were team sponsors, the league, or someone. The parents of the Fugees players were seen as powerless, she believed, team playing at a marked disadvantage. The situation with the field underscored frustrating reality for Luma. She despised Fugees children the sort of opportunities, educational or otherwise, available to better off American kids. But for now, the Fugees organization consists of one woman running practices on a ragtag field while scrambling off the field from one crisis. Luma realized she needed help. She began to recruit from the pool of when dealing with refugee families. She would have to find someone as passionate about the work as she was. In 2005, through the family, I forgot how to pronounce this. Luma had met a Nebraskan named Tracy Ediger, who had moved to Georgia to work with refugees. Ediger had grown up on a corn and soybean farm, West Lincoln, in a strict evangelical Christian family. She and her 3 sisters attended church 3 times a week, rarely watched television growing up, and had each enrolled at a Christian college after high school. Tracy studied biochemistry as an undergraduate and had gone on to pursue an MD PhD at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, an intensive 8-year degree that portended a career as a doctor or medical researcher. The program had worn her down. Deprived of sleep and surrounded by the greatly Tracy was losing her empathy. I was tired and I started to feel like I was everything, she said. Like, what have I gotten myself into? Tracy realized that a career in medicine wasn't for her, but she had the faintest of what else. After graduation, she got in her car and drove to Maine, where she worked temporary jobs and waited for a kind of eureka moment to give clarity to her career search. But the moment never came. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I came up with nothing, Tracy recalled, and I'm supposed to be making plans for the rest of my life. Tracy headed south to be with one of her sisters, who had decided to volunteer at Jubilee Partners, a Christian-run facility in the woods near Comer, Georgia, that serves as a transition point for refugee families who had just arrived in the United States. Tracy joined up as well and spent time teaching English to just arrived Somali Bantu refugees for $15 a week. The experience, she said, was cathartic. While Tracy fretted over her own career, she was working with people who had been through dislocation and war and who still managed to show kindness to the strangers around them. You sit on the porch and you wouldn't be able to talk, but somehow you always felt welcome, she said. In spite of what they've been through and despite our lack of commonality, they were all generous and friendly and open. It's very different than the way that people live in the U.S. Tracy said she began to see the stress she felt about her own career in a different light. It made me now to me. Tracy worked at Jubilee at $15 on and off for the next year and a half. Along the way, she would go to Atlanta to check on refugees in Jubilee during their settlement in Clemson. People like Paula Balgamir from Congo, whose sons Grace and Joshua now for Luma on the Through Paula, Tracy met Luma, who idly mentioned she was looking for a coordinator for a soccer program, someone who could handle logistics. Tracy was reticent. She had no intention of moving to a big city like Atlanta. Kept Paula each time that she was Tracy, as Luma and Tracy got to know each other, they found they had something powerful in common. We had the same families. We felt that we didn't the rest of our lives, she said. It was of 2006 when she went to watch the Fugees play in soccer. But there was a moment after which particularly affected her. Players were walking the field at the old football stadium where youth soccer games were now played. And Tracy spotted Grace, what she had met just after his family arrived in the United States. The kids up the steps and in the summer of 2006, Tracy agreed to join the Fugees for a year. She would have no salary, but she had no debts, and her car, an old 1990 Chevrolet S10 pickup she'd bought from her father for $900, was poor. Tracy figured she could pick up a part-time job in Atlanta to make ends meet. For the Fugees, she would serve as a team manager, a job that included everything from driving the YMCA's bus to running tutoring sessions for Luma's players. She would also apply the research skills she'd honed in graduate school to ferreting out funding opportunities and grants for the program. Beyond that, Tracy figured she'd make it up as she went along. In retrospect, she said she didn't quite realize what she was getting into. I didn't have any idea that this would take over my life, she said. In late July, Luma set about a familiar task. She called a few of her established players to let them know about tryouts, though for the most part, that wasn't necessary. Luma's voicemail was full of messages from her kids asking when soccer would begin. She returned the calls, and soon word spread about the parking lots and apartment complexes around town. Tryouts for the Fugees fall season would take place the second week of August. Dust and chaos be damned. Right, so finally finished part 1, and we will be on to part 2, a new season. I do not know when I will do this. Hopefully tomorrow. If not, then whenever I do it. Thanks.